there was government in Somalia and there was systems in Somalia that was working. 1991, when the civil war started, the adolescents, the ones that lived in refugee camps, particularly the neighboring country of Kenya. Some in Ethiopia, that's where everybody went.
They lost family members, they lost properties, they lost everything, left everything behind. Some of them flee on foot for weeks and months to get to somewhere safe.
On that migration to the refugee camp, a lot of them witnessed a lot of horrors, abuses, like tortures.
Whole People, Healing Journeys is a TPT Partnerships co-production with Centra Care Health.
Life in the refugee camps, it's kind of harsh because they still witness those tortures, those abuses. And then you hear women talking about sexual abuse that they've witnessed or gone through. There's also a lot of like physical abuse that happens there, and not knowing how to process that or deal with it at that moment because they're so stuck on how do I get out of here? How do I survive? How do I get through the next day?
Kids that were born when the war broke out, they've experienced great trauma as much as the adults and elders.
In that moment too, like parents aren't worried about what has my child seen? How is this going to affect them in the future? They're more worried about where am I going to get my next meal from? How am I going to get them out of here into like a safe place? Until they transition into like a community where they feel safe, it's very difficult for them to come to like a realization of how that affects them in their future too.
Their situation is more of like what's called complex trauma, that they've been living in that situation and they're unable to escape from it for such a long time. So you have this kind of like prolonged exposure of trauma, almost 3 decades now.
When you're in that instance of where the trauma is happening and its occurrences over and over again, you're more focused on creating that sense of hope. Like, I can get out of here and I will not go through this again. I will not think about this again. It's things that people say to themselves over and over again. Their immigration here, that process is very daunting too. Applying for immigration statuses, they can take years and years.
The first waves that came here in Minnesota back in the middle 90s, the one that were born under when there was government in Somalia, when they come here, they were able to succeed in life because they've had the educational background, they've had some type of exposure to seeing their parents working. Then you've had second phase of people coming here is the ones that are really lived in refugee camps for like 6, 7, 8 years. They came here without having significant educational background. They don't even know how to write and read their own language. They've also suffered some type of post-traumatic stress disorder. They've also had victims of what was happening in Somalia.
If you have somebody who as a child fled from their home country, they just have a whole conglomeration of traumas.
So when you come here, you don't leave that behind.
That's a misconception that a lot of us have had immigrating to the United States. Is like we think, okay, like I'm no longer going to be living in a refugee camp or worrying about kind of like where my next meal is coming from or any of this. Once I'm out of here, then that's all going to be out of my head and I'm going to be okay and things will work out.
One client said that she was sexually assaulted by 10 men while her husband was beaten to death right there, and it was helpless. He couldn't do anything for her. And like that, you come here to America and then you think that's all gone, but it's really not.
When they come here, obviously there's struggle with integrating to like Western society.
For this community, trauma is not only the past part, it's also present part, everyday life. Because families and children face everyday stresses of life, adjustments here, financial difficulties. navigating the systems, parents' mental illness, language difficulties as well.
But once they find like that stable housing and they're able to feel safe in that environment, then it's kind of okay, so how do I deal with these emotions? Because you're no longer in that survival mode.
Sometimes it's downplayed as, well, everybody went through it, so it shouldn't be a problem. They went through it, they're doing fine. So explaining that different people react differently to trauma.
There's some people that at the get-go, they really are having a hard time dealing with all the adjustments that are required because their distress and their trauma or whatever's going on is so intense. And then there's people that get through the first hurdle and they get started and they're working, but oftentimes it's just too much or they lose hope. First they come and they're really excited, and then they get to a point and they think, this is too hard. I can't learn this language. I can't understand people. I give up. So you see that second wave. And then you see that other wave of people that they do get adjusted. They get their jobs. Their kids are doing okay. They're living the life. Maybe they get a house. Maybe they're starting to move up. And then there's a shooting in the community, or there's a fire in an apartment building, or something happens that challenges this belief they had that now we're safe.
The event of October 14 of 2017, it was very shocking to the Somali community of Minnesota. And that's because nobody was expecting the magnitude of that. Seconds, 500 people died. Huge explosive. So the acute stress is that you don't know what happened. You're just shocked, speechless, you're numb, you are disturbed, upset. You just don't have any words to explain other than to cry and feel really sad. So you are in that acute moment. The Somali people in Minnesota experienced that stage.
To recover, to heal from the bad things that have happened, you have to be safe and you have to feel safe, both. And I think at this point, we're backing up, and I don't know that we're creating an environment where people can feel safe or be safe. And we're going to pay the price for that, as well as the refugee community.
Of course, our body's connected from mind to body and soul. So whatever that you have in your mind will manifest in your body in a certain way.
Somali immigrants, they'll use a lot of physical health symptoms to explain their mental health and emotional problems.
Many speak about their suffering in physical terms. They have heart disease as a common expression that they use, which, unless they really have what we consider heart disease, I understand that as sort of depression.
Symptoms of trauma can actually lead to physical pains, back pain, leg pain. Sometimes it involves dizziness, stomach problems.
They are experiencing great health issues like medical, physical, mental. They come here and they complain about chronic pain. They complain about everything. And then you just listen into knowing that all this is coming from their trauma, but they're really not aware of it.
These refugees that come from a more simple and direct way of working with physical health are put into our health system and have to negotiate all these different doctors and places to go and articulating their illnesses. And with a Western doctors who are inclined to hear heart disease as literally heart disease, we in this culture separate mind and body. And so we address body illnesses, but are less able to integrate mental illnesses.
And then they'll go see the doctor, and then it'll be physical symptoms. So they'll be given, for instance, ibuprofen and etc. So it'll help them treat the physical symptom, but not the mental symptom.
I've seen clients come in with bag full of medications. When I ask questions about why are you taking this medication, they don't even know.
The linguistic system of Somalia hasn't been developed to be able to understand mental health concepts.
Somali language does not have depression, PTSD, anxiety, all those words for mental health. People are labeled as crazy, and there's nothing else after that.
A lot of them believe that mental health does not exist. So if there's something's wrong with an individual, they have a jinn or they're crazy.
A lot of my refugees have idioms of distress. And I've learned from them, if I listen to the idiom and I think about how that feels, I will understand. So one of the things that a woman said to me one time is, we were talking about something very scary and very upsetting, and she said, "My heart has flown out the window." And I thought, okay, what's that mean? And I stopped for a minute and I sort of thought about it. I thought, okay, well, how would I feel if my heart went out the window? And I thought, oh, I wouldn't be in the room anymore. I would be out the window. So for me as a mental health, that's dissociation. That's something that I know is dissociation. Somebody said it's like 1,000 camels walking across your chest. Well, that sounds like a little bit like anxiety to me or panic, you know?
The cultural stigma that a lot of Somalians face with mental health, not acknowledging it like as a major issue like within the community.
The main reason why so many people don't want to seek help is because of, oh, they're afraid of being called crazy.
Stigma is also true for Minnesotans too, you know. This concept of mental illness is just, you know, it's not fun, and it's not, people don't want to be associated with.
The last few years, a lot of community leaders have been trying to change kind of the dialogue around mental health and acknowledging, like, yes, we face a lot of trauma. Yes, it is helpful to talk about this, and it actually builds better resiliency too.
Parents don't want labeling for the kids. This is true for everybody. So when I worked in hospitals, you've had parents come to you and say that, well, you know, whatever's happening, I don't want my kids to be labeled into some terms I don't understand. Well, then my response would be, well, it's not labeling, but you hear it because there is a problem. We need to identify what that problem is and to address what that problem is. So then to do so, these are the terms that's used for the problem, but you're more than welcome if you want to call it something else, you know what I mean?
My job as a mental health professional is to be an interpreter across cultures and languages. So it doesn't matter what I call an illness to my patient, as long as I understand that the patient and I are communicating what is the problem and why does it functionally impair.
Children tends to pick up and learn quickly than the parents do. What the issue going to be is you might have cultural clash or problems with identity. That is where parent and child have a conflict. Child sees life in a different way, parent sees life in their own way.
I think there's some communities where the children won't even speak their native language. You know, and of course, you know, young people, they want to acculturate, they want to become part of the mainstream. It's a normal, natural thing. But I think that there's a challenging loss for the middle generation, the parents of these kids, when they see their kids, you know, not speaking language, not living the culture.
Kids do integrate much faster due to like their school settings that they go to or their friends and whatnot. So they pick up on other cultures much faster than the parent would.
So often the parents have a hard time being in charge and being parents. That when they get over here, be it because they're traumatized and ill or for whatever other reason, many of the families that I work with, the children sort of run the show. The children translate and do a lot of interpreting. The children are able to interact with the bureaucracies and the services and aren't quite as afraid to do that. And so the family roles get inverted. And it's, I think, a very painful loss for a lot of the parents and the grandparents. And it's complicated then, because how do we empower parents when the children are the ones that have the skills and the ability to interact with the culture?
It may be difficult for the parent to relate to the child, and it may be even more difficult for that child to kind of open up to the parent and kind of like let them know what is happening in their day-to-day lives.
Kids that are the middle generation that are pulling to become part of our culture, they want to Americanize. And then when we demonize their own community, when we talk about refugees as bad people, as criminals, that puts them in a terrible, terrible bind.
The effects of racism, Islamophobia on younger children, especially integrating into the school system. And it does take a toll.
We have got to be aware of how we are talking about these people in their communities, because kids are listening and the kids are taking it in and they want to be American. So what does it do to you if you hear that you come from a country that's not respected by this culture? What does that do to your self-esteem? What does that do to your sense of, I have a place in this community, I can make a difference, I want to make a difference? How do you not get angry?
The younger they are, like when they arrive in the recent few years, they're more open to talking about it because they're in school, they're getting education, they're asking questions.
The younger ones, they may be more willing to be able to seek intervention if they're having challenges in school, if they're having challenges in learning.
I believe that all cultures have healing strategies. No culture got to this point where they are without having healers, without having ways to heal people. And all we need to do is to understand how different cultures heal and find ways to incorporate that, and we'll be fine.
This school is actually opened in 2005. This is really designed for immigrant students, especially East African students.
65% of our children are refugees or immigrants, and 90% are on the spectrum of English language learners. So we have some children that have come here not speaking any English, and then others that just need a boost.
It is very, very important that these kids get a place that they can learn in the same education like others, at the same time that they have to be sustain their culture and a place that they just feel that they are in their home.
This school, they teach you more stuff and they treat you better. If I was going to a public school, they wouldn't treat me as good as they treat me in the school because I'm with other people that have the same tradition as me.
Most of the time, if you're at other schools, you might not feel like there's a lot of people who are the same ethnicity as you, and you might feel kind of scared. You can get comfortable at the school because there's a lot of people that you know.
It's a place, it's an environment that feels just like it's theirs.
Every year, every time we try our best. But in the world, you cannot get perfect everything. So last year, we just figured out we need some changes.
Over the last couple of years, it really struggled academically. In order for the school to move forward, it had to do a better job of meeting the needs of the kids that it was serving. So there was a school turnaround committee that was established. They asked specifically for a community-driven turnaround.
They're talking to their parents, and because it's new, we're just trying to understand each other, and which is so good, and they're welcoming, and we're also welcoming them.
I had been told that there would be no parent involvement here, not to expect it, not to ask for it. And that's another one of those biases that has just gone by the wayside, in that we've had tremendous parent engagement.
I have 2 kids in here. For me, I feel like I'm free to talk to their teachers, and they say it a lot, and my kids get everything. They have a good relationship with their teachers, and I love it so much.
Literally 90% of our parents have participated in more than one conference for their child, which is phenomenal for the best of schools.
99% of our students come from low socioeconomic households, you know, and so definitely poverty is something that's a factor. We have kids that were born here. They have their own trauma, you know, from the neighborhoods that they come from, just what's going on at home. It's a different type of trauma, you know, compared to those that are coming from the refugee background.
Life circumstances that are unpredictable, not having what you need in life, not being able to trust or count on things.
Their home country has been taken by the civil war. So even if the kid is born here, still they have the effect of that because their parents have it.
You have people that have been through trauma themselves, such as myself. I mean, I was a refugee in the 90s during the Somali Civil War.
All these many factors combined together make delay for their learning.
We look at the environment and what does it say to people and how does it make people feel safe. We look at the techniques that we use to talk with people, the signage that we have up. It's just a multitude of different things, all with the idea if we can create a sense of safety for people who've been traumatized, that's step number one in trying to help them heal, being safe and feeling safe.
So the first thing we sort of tackled was the physical environment and learning about what values were important, culturally what was important, what art was important, what food was significant, trying to create a really calm learning environment, and a huge focus on relationships with the adults in the building so that children knew they were safe.
Everyone that works here has received professional development on how to work with kids who may have experienced trauma and all aspects of post-traumatic stress.
We tried to make it as familiar as possible, while at the same time exposing our children to all kinds of cultures, not just Somali culture.
Here at Dukes Academy, we don't only teaching students about the technology and in the 21st century here, but we also try to develop them and give them some leadership tools where we expose them to different projects worldwide, and also connect them with other students in other parts of the world. We had a connection with students in Taiwan, students in Kazakhstan, in Belgium. That will prepare them so they can see what's going on in other parts of the world so that they have a different perception.
We've changed the approach to discipline. Used to be punitive, now is much more relationship-centered on the positive.
Students, are given warnings, maybe a change in seats. Sometimes they take a buddy break, really sitting out with the kid and really trying to find out what's going on in their lives.
When you change it from one system to another, always there is a challenges, there is, resistances. So that is the little things that we are just facing it, but I think we are overcome in few time.
We're happy with the direction that things have been going because we've seen so many improvements this year, but I don't think that we've arrived yet.
I just like going to school because you learn a lot and you have a future if you go to school.
My favorite subject? I'd say gym. Most of the time we play normally, we play the same sports as the boys, and we still wear our hijabs and all that.
You have a lot of friends and people treat you good.
I know there's a lot of teachers like myself who maybe hadn't been introduced to the Somali community before, but it really only takes one day where you're introduced and you're like, this is the kind of place that I want to be. I can really get behind this community and want to be a part of it and want to see them thrive and be successful.
I have to say, I am in awe of the teachers that work with these kids and their commitment and their sensitivity, and also the drive to get educated in so many of our refugee communities is pretty incredible. I mean, these kids, they really work hard at school. They try their best.
The teachers are working hard here and they're making me ready for high school. I'm not nervous. I'm confident.
We have strengths, we have strategies, they have strategies, we can learn from each other, and that's what we want to use to help people heal. And our Western theories, cognitive behavioral theory, that sort of thing, they may work for people like us that think all the time, but they may not work for people who are, agrarian people who are used to moving, or religious people who are used to recitations and that sort of thing.
Allahu Akbar, Allah.
We are a faith-driven culture, especially in discussing mental health, behavioral health, and such. We tend to run to God, listening to the Quran or reading verses from the Quran. A lot of people use that as a coping mechanism.
Traditional healers is what's always being practiced in Somalia, where if you have any problems related to health, that you would first go to the sheikh, who you would sit down with, and then you would read the Quran, and that should take care of your illness.
Inattention is like a big symptom with trauma and PTSD. So kind of maintaining that focus for those few minutes when you're praying and you're not going back to that trauma that you experienced as a child or adolescent.
That will relieve the symptoms, but you're not solving the underlying problems. There's been a bottom-up approach in the community. Fairview Health Systems have trained imams in the mosque and they've been taught to identify symptoms of mental illness. They've also been taught to do referrals.
The good thing is that many of the people gather in their own communities. They live near other people of their culture, and around those clusters of people there grow up special doctors, mental health professionals who understand the culture and know how to work with it.
Having the ability to bridge the linguistic and cultural barriers is very important. You know, I think it plays a lot in my role of work here.
Having a Somali-speaking therapist, it would definitely make it easier for them to express their trauma and what they've been through.
I think we, white people, will look at the stories that we hear from other people and we think, that must destroy people and how can they ever readjust? And that isn't the truth. The truth is, even though they've been exposed to tons and tons of trauma, most people get on with their life and are able to function and live well. They make a life, they raise their family, they live happily, and are able to really be resilient. And I think that's pretty inspiring and pretty remarkable.
Whole People, Healing Journeys is a TPT Partnerships co-production with Centra Care Health.